Hello, and welcome to today's main event, Assessing and Improving Localization Maturity. My name is Tucker Johnson, and I'll be hosting this discussion today. The localization program at Qualtrics has undergone revolutionary changes in the last 18 months. Leading the change process is Global Experience Champion Giulia Tarditi. Measuring the maturity and capabilities of the language platform at Qualtrics has played an integral part in the improvements. And in this event, we will learn directly from Giulia about how she and her team have influenced Qualtrics' globalization efforts. The lessons learned will be valuable to any enterprise localization manager who was interested in assessing and improving their own localization programs. Today we're drawing from a case study that was published a while ago, probably about 18 months ago, given the timeline, for the work that Nimdzi's been doing with Qualtrics. It's called Nimdzi Help Me Shape and Validate a Localization Roadmap, and it is available. I'll put a link into the chat in a little bit so that you guys can access that. In that case study, we reported Giulia successfully demonstrated to the rest of the company the maturity of the current localization program, uncovered the gaps, and introduced the vision and strategy for scaling and optimizing the function, including the benchmarking among other SaaS companies. On top of it, Giulia was able to reposition the localization department from support center to revenue driver by demonstrating how localization enables business growth in Tier 1 markets. In the end, Giulia got the budget, trust, and strategic mandate to drive the initiative further. So go ahead and check out that case study. I'll put a link to it in the chat in just a little bit so that you guys can all have access to it. Today's event is part of a larger series of events that Nimdzi has been doing here. We have several tracks going on. We have the Globalization Research Series track, we have the Service Provider Success Series, Lessons in Localization Series, and today's event is part of the Global Enterprise Success Series. If you are following Nimdzi Insights on LinkedIn, you'll notice that we already have some other ones on the calendar, including today's event, Measuring Program Maturity. We're also going to be talking on March 13th to some private equity investors about choosing the right investment in the language services industry. We'll be talking on March 8th about the Lessons in Localization Omnibus. Lessons in Localization Omnibus features research from over 65 enterprise localization departments, talking about their best practices, talking about their technology strategy, talking about all of the things that make them successful. And it's a great benchmarking tool. Nimdzi partners that have access to our Lessons in Localization series of research are already aware that it is a very useful tool for benchmarking their own globalization programs. Lastly, I need to plug the Nimdzi 100, which is here at Nimdzi Insights, is our annual market report we come out with once a year, and it's basically the state of the industry. And on March 7th, we're going to be giving a quick overview of the report. The report is not fully out yet, but you can download the industry ranking and find out who the top 100 LSPs in the industry by revenue are already, and the full market analysis will be coming out shortly, and we'll be talking about it on March 7th with Renato Beninato and Sarah Hickey. So if you don't have time to read the full report, then you can log in and listen as a podcast, watch live on LinkedIn, or listen to the recording on YouTube. Before we go any further, let me introduce our co-hosts and guests or panelists, whatever we want to call them today. I'm joined by my colleague Laszlo Varga. Let's start with you, Laszlo. Welcome to the show. I think this is the first time you're on here. Tell us a little bit about what you do here at Nimdzi Insights.
That's right. This is my first time. Thanks, Tucker. So I've been in the industry for more than 10 years, and actually I've been working together with Tucker at certain points of time in my career. And here
Sorry
at
about
Nimdzi
that.
So am I. That we've worked together very little so far, but more so since I'm with Nimdzi for close to a year now, and it's been a fascinating journey working with some of the amazing clients of Nimdzi and helping them through consultancy, audits, workshops, Q&A sessions, and it's been a fascinating journey so far. And I'm very happy to be connecting here for the localization maturity localization program maturity session. I'm also very interested in technology and supply chain innovation, drivers and measures of performance, and a whole range of that encompasses localization.
Great. Thanks for being here today, Laszlo. And Giulia, our star panelist today, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself and a brief overview, because we're going to get into it here. A brief overview of the work you've been doing at Qualtrics.
Thank you. I lead a Center of Excellence for global experience at Qualtrics. We're a SaaS company headquartered in Utah and Seattle. And I joined between 18 months and 2 years ago to build this function from scratch. And this is the first time in my life that I retrofit localization into what's already a highly complex structure. Qualtrics is a publicly trading company with over 5,000 employees worldwide. So not easy, but it's one of those companies that has had the luxury of growing within an English-speaking space and to put off localization until very, very late. My career, I've done localization program build and team built from scratch at a couple of different companies, mostly scale-ups in EMEA, and both as an employee and as an advisor. And this is me.
Well, welcome. And I can certainly attest. And like I said, we're going to be getting into it. You've been busy over the last 18 months to 2 years at Qualtrics.
Definitely.
So here's how I'd like to structure this today. I have a rudimentary agenda here. Introductions, we've got that taken care of. Case studies, I already mentioned some. I'll put some more in the links here. Reasons for a localization program audit. That's how I want to frame the conversation today. We'll talk about programs of or components of maturity when it comes to a localization program, and then talk about the results and what that looks like in practicality in a tangible way at Qualtrics. And I have linked here on the screen, and I'll be sending the slide deck out later. We've got a couple resources here available at nimdzi.com on localization maturity assessments, localization audits, as we sometimes call them. Understanding what is a localization audit, what does it mean, why would you run one, what are the benefits, how do you know that you're ready for one, and what you need to know. So you can find those available at nimdzi.com, and once again, I'll try to link those in the comments as well. To help frame our discussion today, I want to just set the tone with going over some of the reasons to conduct a localization assessment or a localization audit. And not spend a lot of time on this, but I think it'll help frame our conversation as we go forward today. So, reasons to conduct a localization audit. We've got localization governance, localization strategy, localization best practices, team setup, outperform your competitors, vendor management setup, explore new markets, automation, and quality program. And these are just kind of some of the things that assessment is going to look at. I personally like to keep things simple when we're running a localization audit, and I like to break it down for enterprise clients anyways into 4 different categories, and that includes culture, project management, vendor management, and technology. In my mind, these are the key things that you want to look at when you're assessing any localization program, because everything that you're looking at is probably going to fall into one of these 4 categories. So just keeping that in mind, Giulia, I want to turn it over to you and let you kind of set the stage here by asking you, when you first started in your position, what were some things you were surprised to find out? You mentioned that you'd built this team from scratch. You'd built this localization program from scratch at Qualtrics, and you'd had experience in other positions. What were some of the surprising things that you found out at Qualtrics when you started?
I'd say definitely the first one was that the company had grew so much putting off localization, and now I knew it was going to be so hard. to retrofit it. But the biggest issue was that the leadership team didn't know what localization was for.
Right.
They didn't know what good looked like, but they didn't even knew why they'd hired someone like me or why they'd set the budget aside to build a team. They knew
That's a
some of their
tough role.
competitors had it.
Yeah, that's a tough role to be in when the senior management doesn't know why your role exists. That's dangerous.
I
But
think they did.
somebody
I
did
think they
hire.
did
Yeah.
know, but they, as always with localization, right? It depends how you run it, what you want to do with it. You could run it as a cost center, you could run it as a revenue enabler, as a growth tool, right? And so I think they didn't know what they didn't know. None of them had been overseeing localization in previous roles. And so it, if you want to see the glass half full, which is what I saw myself, is, well, this is a massive opportunity because it's going to be down to me to define, I've got a blank canvas, what localization is and what it can do for this company. Now, the issue is, as a newbie, as a newcomer, you don't really understand the business that well. You can have an ABC of how SaaS works and how, where localization is or should be in SaaS with regards to the contribution that it makes compared to another type of venture, maybe a B2C venture. But you still have to experiment what works and what doesn't, and to really grasp the customer pain points and the company's pain points with regards to localization. So how you're asked to set up the governance, you're asked to educate a whole company on what this function actually is and what it can do for them. And at the same time, you're trying to learn the business. And
Right.
that wasn't easy to do, even with 14 years of experience in localization client side. And so for the first time in my career, I thought I needed a lot of help from an external party and not in the shape of an LSP, right? So it's interesting how it's accepted as best practice that if you need to sort out a big mess or to improve a vertical or a unit of a big company, you would pay bags of money to someone like PwC or Accenture, or they come in, do an audit,
Oh yeah,
and tell you what's wrong,
they think
right? And
nothing of
that's where you
dropping
start,
$500,000 to have a big consulting firm come in. But when it comes to localization
right?
and you're asking for $50,000, it's like pulling teeth.
Exactly. And so I was like, there must be something similar in localization. And where do I go? And I had spoken to you guys at a previous in-person event. And so I thought I'd give you a ping and see if that was a service that you could help with.
Well, and the rest is history. So I think you already answered our second question here, which is why was it important to assess the maturity of your program? If I'm taking away what you said, if I'm understanding correctly, essentially it was you were starting from ground zero and you're trying to educate a senior management that didn't necessarily even know what they didn't know. And
Yeah.
so having an outside agency come in and kind of validate things, even though you knew. I remember because I worked on, full disclaimer for everyone out there, I worked on this project personally. And I remember you had a pretty good idea of the direction that you wanted to go as far as your roadmap and everything. So
It's not the same as knowing that you're right? Like it's a lot of money and a lot of people's resources to go on and just use your common sense and previous experience to think that you're on the right track. I didn't want to chance it. I knew that this was one of the biggest chances in my career,
yeah.
right? I think we all have like more or less defining moments and defining roles. I had one many years ago when I started out in localization management. And I was a Badu at the time. And I remember wishing there was something like this I could turn to. I was like, there must be a KPMG of localization, but there wasn't, right? There were a lot of vendors who wanted to sell, translation quality processes or packages,
Yeah.
or not even TMSs at the time. And so I think years later, then you try and do it yourself. And of course, you learn as you go. But then once I got here, and I was like, it was my dream to work in experience management. Having always thought that language is just a layer of experience, I was like, if I learn experience management and I can prove that language does have a massive impact on experience, then it's really going to help me grow and help this company in return. And so having an audit, like doing an assessment of where you are, it's like the prerequisite. Otherwise, how do you know where to go? Right.
It
And
goes
yeah, I
back
could
to the
assess.
you can't improve what you can't measure, right?
You can improve what you can't measure. And also, I remember I was about a month in when I connected with you. I had already had a couple of company all hands and heard leadership, like the C-suite talking, and I had noticed two things. They were obsessed with benchmarking,
Okay.
right? Like knowing what others are doing in our space, and data. And that's a very good place to be. At
Oh,
Qualtrics, we
yes.
got like an amazing leadership team. The C-suite is absolutely a team of rock stars. And so I was like, this is a dream. If I can put forward recommendations and a strong roadmap validated by a neutral third party, right? Someone that can assess. It's not just me saying, hey, I think you should do this because that's what my experience says,
Right.
limited in a field. Then I can get the buy-in to really go and get this done the way I know I can. And that was a really good starting point, I think.
Laszlo, do you have anything to add?
Well, what we also see from the clients that we work with is they often struggle with what kind of data to even look at. So there's always a lot of data available for assessment and analysis. The hard question is, which ones are the ones that are really relevant, that will really move the needle and help, in your case, a localization program demonstrate that it actually has an impact on the company's performance as well as in customer satisfaction. And then we'll be very curious to hear how all the data that Qualtrics has is being used in localization in your program.
Not all the data is being used in a program, right? Let me see, where do we start? There's the classic black box data, right, of what you translate, how fast, and so on and so forth. But I knew I would not get far with that pitching to the leadership team. They wouldn't care. Like the question mark they had in their mind was, why have I hired this person and her team, right? What are they going to give me back in return? And so it wasn't easy. I remember feeling like a human crawl, going through pages and pages of our intranet and trying to look at people's OKRs. Qualtrics were really good with OKRs, right? Like everyone has got their key results and etc. And I was trying to figure out, okay, so who my top stakeholders are, because again, you've just started, right? You can use common sense and so on, but every business is different. So what are the business units? What's top of mind for these guys? What keeps them up at night? What are they trying to do this year? And what are they paid for? And how, which of these things I can have an impact on, or I think I could have an impact on.
How
I'm
do
going
I
to try it
help?
out.
How do I help my stakeholders get their bonuses at the end of the year?
Exactly, right?
There's a different way of saying that. It's just like, what is the game that they're playing, and how can I help win them win that game?
Fair.
Because they are my customers.
Right.
Right. My customers are my stakeholders internally.
Of course.
And so I remember one of the first data was team data, right? Because mine was a new team. Do I have the right size team? Do I have the right roles within the team? So what are others doing? What are our customers doing? But also what are others in the SaaS space doing, which is something that we looked at as part of the first assessment with yourselves, I remember. And then we do, of course, track operational metrics that speak of our efficiency as a team, but those are not the metrics that we report out on to the leadership team. It's as if we didn't have OKRs of our own, but rather we cut through the data, right? We slash through the data with a language lens, any data, usage, data across languages, platform usage data, for example, or pipeline data per language, and sales quota per language. And so we try and understand what's the baseline and what happens after we come into the picture. Is there a positive impact, and in what measure? And when we pull localization away, what happens, right? Does that positive impact suddenly stop, or how does it work?
So I can imagine that took a lot of collaboration with the other team, so a high level of cooperation, and being the new kid on the block, so to speak. What were some of how did you go about building those relationships internally with the other members of your organization, your stakeholders, your clients, as you call them? Was that a high priority for you at the beginning, or is it something that you're working on now? Talk to us a little bit about that, maybe.
Yeah, I did. I remember at the beginning, going and knocking on people's doors, because some people knew of my appointment and of this new team, but the vast majority didn't. And they were running at full speed, so they're absolutely not to blame. But I did the human crawl first, right? So I knew what mattered to them before I'd have any conversation.
Okay.
Right. And I wouldn't use it
The
in the
human
conversation,
crawl.
just,
Is
yeah.
I've never heard that term before. That's an interesting term. So is that
Um,
where you're just going and knocking on doors and saying, "Hey, I'm here. How can I help you?"
yeah, but only after having figured out what mattered to these people, right? So I had an
Got it.
internal
Okay.
Right.
spreadsheet of who is what do they do, what do they care about. And then once I had an ABC, I would go and meet them. And at least I was really prepped for the conversation. And I had a couple of stories lined up of how I had helped in the past people in those functions, and being really careful initially, really wary of suggesting something that had worked in the past in a completely different company and sounding like, someone who was presumptuous and maybe had come in and sort of very vertically start saying, we got to do things differently. So I would really listen. I would ask a lot of questions. What are your pain points, right? What was your experience with localization so far? What do you think we could do to help? And lots of questions about what they were trying to do. Because the problem was, if I just asked them, what do you think I can do to help? Very often they would say, no, I just don't need translations.
Yeah.
Because in their mind, this was just a mere translation function, right?
Sure.
And so
Well,
that
and they don't
was really hard.
understand all the ways that a mature localization program can help them.
Yeah,
They don't even
they
know
don't,
what they don't know. They don't even know what to ask
right?
for, right?
But then I had a good weapon, which was that of the maturity assessment, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, listen, I know we are not where we should be. And I know where the industry, other players in the industry are. And I think with your help, I can take us there. But it was very much sort of hand holding as a proposition. Let's get there together. If you let me into your world, if you share with me what you're trying to do, what you're trying to achieve, regardless of what you think I could do to help, then perhaps we could get there together, and it's going to be a win-win for everyone involved, right?
That sounds like a very customer-centric approach. Yes.
So what we're like I mentioned earlier, so you're going to your stakeholders and you're what did you say, door crawling or whatever it is, and you're talking to them. Well, first of all, you're doing your background, you're profiling. You're in a sales role essentially, right? So for our LSP salespeople out there in the audience, like you can relate to this. You're profiling, you're understanding your prospects' concerns and seeing how you can address them, and then you're going and knocking on doors, building that relationship, building trust with them, and in the back of your mind, you had some idea of the direction that you thought you could go with this. And I remember part of the original assessment. So, clarification for those guys listening. I mean, we mentioned, I mean, it's clear that Nimdzi had worked with Giulia on the localization maturity assessment. We just finished up a second one, though, 18 months later, to show the results of what has happened in the last 18 months. But during that initial assessment, part of it, of course, was making recommendations on where to prioritize your time. And part of that was roadmap validation. So you kind of had a roadmap that you were planning on implementing and different components of that. How much of that changed over the last 18 months? How much of it was like, nope, this is my plan and I'm going to do it. And 18 months later, I can say everything's checked off and it went perfectly. But how much of it had to evolve because of different things that were happening within the organization?
All of it.
Yeah. Sounds about right. You know, that's what do they say that, you know, the best battle plan changes the minute the first shot is fired, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
And it's because I guess I have a fabulous team, by the way, right? So I have a team of 5, each dedicated to one work stream. I've got someone who looks after translation technology, Alex. I've got Gabriele, who's in charge of the language data program. He's our data storyteller. I've got Pedro, who looks after the whole supply chain and vendor management. And I got Linda, who's our program manager, super senior, really good experience across product localization and engine localization. And then I got Lucia, who's in charge of quality management, right? How do we get quality, but not quality for the sake of it, like quality, and how does quality impact all of those things like usability and CSATs and satisfaction in general for the customer. And we had to change pretty much everything as our know-how, as our knowledge of the business grew, and as our awareness of the things that were working more than others, where the return investment was greater, grew with us. So we were more in the know of what Qualtrics did, and the business also grew, right? It's still a very recent business, and you grow so much quarter by quarter, week by week. But also our tech stack grew, right? We had some basics roadmap of how do we build an ecosystem to do localization at scale across so many content streams. And as that grew in its capacity and maturity, we also were, well, hang on a minute, then there is this other work stream, this other team that we could onboard, right? We could also look at this stream that is generating revenue and see if there's translation needs there, and also take them under our umbrella. And as our reputation grew, there was a lot of word of mouth, and more people, more and more teams, more and more units wanted to engage with our COE. And so our plans, thank God, I would like to say, changed completely, because we wanted to be agile. We knew as a new team, you got to be agile.
Yeah.
You can't come with a predefined way. You got to have a plan, but you got to have a plan or how you're going to change that as stuff happens, right? As life happens. And I think we have been, having been able to adapt to that, what was going on with the macroeconomic situation as well, right? The roadmap of Qualtrics also changed massively. Our ability to adapt and pivot on a dime has been the making of this team.
The team is amazing. I can attest to that. And one of the key things that has stuck out to me from our conversation is that you've kept the team very lean, right? And lean is the word I remember it kept coming up. How has that served you throughout this process as the company has faced its challenges? Is that a struggle to have? Because sometimes a cynical approach to interpreting that word could just mean like, oh, lean means small, right?
Hmm.
But lean means so much more. That's why I like that word.
Yeah,
What has had the importance of having an optimized lean team?
yeah. Well, communication is much easier, right?
Oh,
I
yeah,
think when you're
fair.
starting out, you've got to be lean because otherwise it's a bit like in that game where you talk to someone and then they talk to someone, and then by the time the chain is finished, the sentence is completely different. We knew we didn't want that. And I also knew that coaching a large team was harder. And not just me coaching them, but them coaching me and us
Mm,
coaching each other, right? We had very different skill set, very different experiences. Together, we were 360 localization dream team machine. And plugging in someone new, the only role that we didn't have when we started was the data storyteller. And I remember coming to you and saying, what about if I add this to our team rather than a project manager? How would it fit? Have you heard someone doing it? And if not, can we look at the pros and cons and
mm,
discuss why it could work here? But I knew that, and that was a really like a good winning card. But other than that, plugging in anyone new when we were running so well
yeah.
and we were really deep in what we had to deliver would have been disruptive in a bad way. We wanted to grow a little bit, but then, as we know, macroeconomic circumstances, not necessarily an easy one to do. Keeping
Yep.
the team lean right now is the best thing we can do because then we can control and pivot much quicker.
Hmm.
And our value to the organization is there for everyone to see. Will we stay this small? I don't think so, not
Well,
forever,
you have to
right?
grow
As
eventually,
our
eh?
remit grows, but we will stay lean,
Yeah.
right?
Fair.
One
Because yeah, we will never throw people at a problem. We will
one
always
of the
try and
things,
optimize for the second.
um, sorry to jump in. One of the things that we see from some of our enterprise clients is the way they scale their localization team up and down is they outsource it. They outsource some of the even core localization functions to their LSPs. Even program management, stakeholder management, knowledge management, and all those items that ultimately come and bite you in your tail because, well, if you're left with a very, very not lean but small team in-house, then you're running the risk of, hey, all that knowledge is going to get lost if there's another set of layoffs coming. And then if there
Yeah,
is out of 3 people, suddenly one of them has to leave the team, move to another position or leave the company, then suddenly you're cut seriously in your ability not just to deliver, but to grow your localization program. This
mm,
is one of the challenges that we see.
yeah,
Have you been facing anything similar? You're thinking about growing your team, which is fantastic.
yeah. I mean, I've been through the overhiring and overfiring in a
Right.
couple of startups, right? And so I'm always super wary. One of the first thing I do when I build a team is never have duplication of roles because that makes you very like an easy prey when an auditor comes in and says you got to cut costs,
Yeah.
right? And so first thing we did was establishing very clear roles and highly diverse functions and roles within the team. I'm very much a sort of in-house kind of gal. I outsource what needs to be outsourced, but the core stuff to me is in-house, right?
I
Even if
guess
that means like being highly lean
Yeah.
and having a really good, solid vendor strategy. And, you know, we call them partners. We don't call them vendors anymore at Qualtrics, right? So if you got the right partners and you're enabling them so well, that's what Pedro and my team is focused on. Then you can get amazing results, but you gotta outsource the right stuff. And that doesn't, I don't think there's a by the book stuff that you gotta outsource and not. I've seen people outsourcing whole functions and all teams with, in a successful manner. I think it very much depends on the company and on the team itself, right? The skills that you're missing and that you can control. I don't want to come across as a control freak, but you think you can control the success of from in-house, you can probably outsource.
Well, that brings us to your vendor strategy. We haven't touched upon that because that's a huge part of assessing a globalization program is what's the vendor strategy? I mean, you can go anywhere from full freelancer model to working with a single vendor. And, I don't think we need to get into the details of who exactly you're working with and what kind of vendors and all of that stuff. But what were your expectations versus reality when you came in and started assessing what's going on with the vendors? What was it? What was it like before? Because that'll be a fun story. That's always a fun story. It's like what organically was created in the organization in the vacuum of not having a localization director.
Yeah. Everyone had brought in their own suppliers.
Surprise.
Chosen them.
Surprise.
Unvetted. Some vetted, some not. But there was a incredibly long list of vendors without any framework for how they were being brought in, how they were being enabled, looked after, and assessed, their performance and stuff. And so sifting through that, but even just getting access to the list was really hard because we didn't know, like every day, I remember every day I would become aware of the existence of yet another team.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Who had done, outsourced their own translations. And then when we finally got hold of the list of vendors, there were so many. And there was not a logic, right? There wasn't like, oh, it's just a per stream or per team or per region or per language. It wasn't. Some were freelancers, some were huge vendors, some were tiny vendors, some were someone's cousins, and so it had to be looked at in detail. So what I didn't want to do was pull the plug and say we go down to zero, remove everyone. And so what we did was we let things go as they were and we prepare a framework. So this is what we think the situation should be. These are the content streams. This is where perhaps we would benefit from having a single vendor or multiple vendor, one per region, or there's are some trickier sort of tier one type of contents where we need a different level of service. So having someone with a highly differentiated service offering would be key. And then we started and went down the list and tried to map the existing approved vendors, approved by InfoSec and so forth, to what we had in the framework. And then we didn't do like an RFP of sorts, but we did really good, we had a really good due diligence process led by Lucia in charge of quality to select vendors. So there were tests and the tests were highly encompassing, all of the different content types that these people would have to localize. And then we were really happy to reduce that list by probably between 80 and 95%.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're happy,
Yeah.
and it doesn't mean that it's going to stay that lean or that small, but it works for us right now.
Well, you kind of got to break it down before, because I don't want to throw any info I shouldn't out there, but I know you're kind of looking at some specialty vendors out there to solve some specialty problems that your stakeholders have. But it's hard to add vendors when you already have 80 different vendors that you're working with. So you kind of have to break everything down to the foundation, and then you can start adding on top of that to make sure that every vendor that you do have, there's a reason for it. Like there is a direct value proposition. You know why am I working with these guys and why am I working with these guys? Because then you can build on that essentially.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we talked about culture, I think, a lot with the door crawling, the talking to the management. We talked about project management and the importance of keeping that lean. We've talked about vendor management now, and we've got everybody's favorite topic left on the list here: technology. How has the
Let's dive in.
technology? I can't imagine that any of those teams were using a mature TMS workflow solution when you came
Mm.
in. So, what did that look like? What was the role of building out a technology program at Qualtrics?
Mhm. There wasn't a TMS, and not one that Qualtrics owned. There was one of our biggest shareholders had a TMS, and we were using theirs.
Wait,
But it was not optimized as for our needs,
yeah, I
and
mean,
was only being used for a specific content stream. So where do we start? So we built a scorecard.
data, data, data.
Data
Yep.
Of course.
before we started looking at options out there. We knew we wanted something that could centralize, if not 100% of all the content needs that we had, at least 90% of the ones we were in the know of. And we knew the budget that we had, right? And that had to be taken into account. But the scorecard, Alex and my team built a scorecard, and it was an absolute success because all of the people in the team who participated in vetting all of the different TMSs we looked at, and MT aggregators, and so on and so forth, they could then give their score for a number of categories, and then the total score was created looking at what everyone else had put in. And so our winner was decided just purely based on data. We wanted to make a very rational decision also because of connectors and ease of integration, so as not to become a problem to engineering, right? We didn't want to become a problem to
Oh
anyone.
no,
We were still
especially
trying
not
to
engineering.
establish our brand. And it was a lot of fun. So we have brought in a TMS. It hasn't been incredibly plug and play, as it never is, and we progressively onboarded more and more content streams onto it, and now things are working highly functional, I would say. We have between 90 and 95% of all content going through our new TMS right
Wow.
now.
Wow.
And so from zero, it's a good bump, in probably a year.
So I think we've covered the basis here. Laszlo, what you got for us?
I would love to ask, in such a fresh localization program, there's so much morphing and adjustment, as you said. I would love to hear from you. How do you structure the thinking around improvements and innovation when it comes to localization?
How do I structure?
Yes, innovation and improvement thinking for localization.
Mm-hmm.
Other than you come to Nimdzi and
I
ask,
was going to say she works with
hey,
Nimdzi, of course.
So it's a really good question. I think it's always innovation is always happening, right? You can't, a
Right.
localization program is not something static that you build it. It's not like a statue, you build it and it's there. It's something that's continuously, almost in a Kanban sort of way, it's continuously happening and evolving. And so I'd make time every month for, I call it discovery, right? Sort of keeping up with the industry. It could be looking at a recording of a webinar or something. I try and read as much as I can, and I try and find out a lot about what other people in my role are doing elsewhere. It doesn't need to be in my industry, but in tech and in other roles. And I try and go to conferences, and speak to like-minded people in roles that are not localization related, but partners of mine. For example, I'm an avid listener of go-to-market webinars and podcasts, because they give me so much juice that I can then use when I'm trying to sell an idea to someone that is in go-to-market, because I can speak their language.
That's right.
And same for things like product-led growth. And ops management. And then I'm always trying to be a better manager for my team, right? So I always try and keep up with best practices for employee engagement and manager effectiveness. I look after manager effectiveness and my score in a very careful way. Like I'm always keeping an eye on it, measuring almost obsessively, because I want my team to have the best manager for them to grow, because I'm only as successful as my team.
Fair.
Right. And the company, right, and our localization strategy is always going to be only as successful as how well we run as one. I don't know if I'm very innovative for non-localization standards, but I always think that you've got to take innovation from lots of different sources, some within localization and some outside of it. And drag and drop the elements that you like and try and see if you can build a puzzle with them where the pieces fit together.
That's a very nice sentiment. And I guess what I hear you say is that you often go what in localization is called upstream for ideas, such as go-to-market or product marketing specifically. And as a matter of fact, that marketing as a function is typically one of the biggest beneficiaries of localization, together with globalization and internalization. That forms a lovely framework that, all the brand experience, all the marketing people are using in their day-to-day life. That's fantastic to hear. I think that's a very good advice to almost any localization program management team.
Yeah. And I just want to push back on Giulia a little bit here, because you say, oh, I don't feel like I'm very innovative. And it's because you're too close to it. I think if you're innovative every single day, then you lose track of just how innovative you actually are, because you and your team, like, credit where it's due, right? And credit to Qualtrics senior management for creating an environment where this can happen. But as I mentioned, we've done 2 maturity assessments, audits of your program, one 18 months ago and one just finished up recently. And I can honestly say I've never seen a program go from 0 to where you guys were at to where you are now in such a short period of time. And that requires innovation. And I don't think innovation is just, when a lot of people think of innovation, we think of technology and automation and stuff like that. But innovation, it's part of it. But innovation is so much more. You can be innovative with your program management strategy. You can be innovative with your vendor strategy. You can be innovative with your quality strategy. We're working with some companies right now that are doing really innovative things, not even touching technology. They're just making tweaks to the way that they manage and define quality, for example. So yeah, sorry to push back, but you are being innovative in the way that you're approaching localization over there, even if you don't realize it.
Thank you, Taka. Do you know what? I was well, there's a bit of imposter syndrome always, but
sure.
I had a couple of really strong managers, leaders that I could really learn from. And my current manager, Julie, as well, she's super experienced and she's so people-led. Like our one-to-one, we start with the people. And I try and learn everything I can from everyone I talk to, right? One of my first managers said to me, be a sponge. Right? And innovation
Suck it up.
will knock on your door even when you're sleeping.
Yeah.
Because you will absorb stuff And maybe you listen to A and you're not going to want to implement A exactly. You're going to come up with B because you've been exposed to A and C, and then you make it yours, right? You make it yours. Just read a lot, hear a lot, be a sponge and make it yours. And then another manager said, suspend disbelief, right? Never think that something is impossible or that you can only look at it in a way that has been approved by someone else or the way you've always looked at it. And I think giving that freedom to someone alongside the freedom to fail is really empowering and definitely gives them the chance to develop in their career in a way that maybe is not innovation led by definition, or you don't think of it as such, but at least you don't limit yourself to the known.
You've had some good managers in your career, giving you good advice. I will back that up.
Lucky you. Yes, absolutely.
And I've tried to get the good out of even the lesser ones, which
because you're a sponge. Because you're a sponge.
It's a skill, right? Like you build a muscle and it works.
Very true. Very true. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here, guys, and I'm also keeping an eye on the chat. Thank you for everybody who's been participating over here in chat. I see some folks, someone's correcting me here. It says, no plan of operations reaches with any certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy, its main force. Helmut von Moltke the Elder. So that's the quote that I was searching for earlier. And of course, we've got...
That was close enough, Tucker.
It was close enough. And of course, we've got the Giulia Tarditi fan club in there shouting your praises. So thank you.
That's so nice.
Yeah. But so thank you for everybody participating in chat. I just want to wrap it up here, kind of put a bookend on what we've been talking about today. I started by mentioning we've got some resources available on Nimdzi Insights, Nimdzi.com, I should say. I would start with these two articles. Localization Audit, 12 Signs Your Localization Program is Ready for a Health Checkup, and Localization Audit, What You Need to Know in Order to Assess the Shape of Your Localization Program. If it sounds like something that's an exercise that you think could be beneficial to your program out there or to a client's program, if you're an LSP and you're like, hey, maybe I could get my clients to shape up their program a little bit, send them these links. Also, we have just a snippet from that, signs that it is a good time to perform a localization audit. I would make the argument, of course, it's always a good time to take stock of where you're currently at, but just some quick ideas here. If you have poor communication, if you have changes in leadership, if you feel that the localization department's being underutilized, you're not tracking the right KPIs, your vendor strategy is not where you'd like it to be, it might be time for a checkup. There's a number of ways that a localization audit could help. It could help you, as we've seen, align your localization activities with the company goals. It could help you dive deeper into areas of the localization program that might not be working. You could get exposed to new ideas, different strategies, save time, money, lots of ways that assessing your localization department could help. And if any of that's interesting to you, like I said, head on over to nimdzi.com or reach out to us and we can have a conversation about it. I can have a conversation about it with you. And before we wrap up completely for today, I just want to go provide any final comments or wrap up. Laszlo, let's start with you.
I loved hearing from Giulia how learning from within and outside of the industry is helping her shape her localization program. I think that's the core message for me from today.
Yeah. Thanks, Laszlo. Giulia, I know you've been on the hot seat this whole time, but closing thoughts. What is your takeaway, your message to your peers in the industry? You mentioned you listen to podcasts to get inspiration. Well, someone out there is listening to you to get inspiration right now. So inspire us. No pressure.
I would say for those that are client side or building programs client side, don't be afraid to go custom, to build a program that doesn't look like any program you've built before. This may end up being the best work you've done so far. And don't be afraid to ask vendors, right, and partners to go boutique and come up with a service that really suits you, that maybe is not on the price list. And yeah, for vendors and for everyone, really, like profiling worked really well for me. And just this thirst for understanding how my partners, my customers work has really elevated the work that myself and my team can put in, and so the impact we can have on a business.
Be a sponge. That's my
Be
takeaway.
a sponge.
In 3 words or less, be a sponge. That's definitely my takeaway today. Well, Giulia, thank you so much for joining us today during this event, taking time out of your busy schedule. Laszlo, always good to collaborate with you as well. Shoot, we've been doing it for like 15 years now.
Something like that.
We have less and less hair every time we see each other. I'm gonna wrap this up and take us out of here today. So, ladies, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today, whether you're joining live or whether you are watching the recording afterwards. Please also join me in thanking our panelists today. We got Giulia and Laszlo, of course. As we are finishing up, if you haven't already done so, make sure that you are following Nimdzi Insights, subscribe to us, because we've got these upcoming events here on LinkedIn, and particularly keep an eye open for the State of the Language Services Industry, which is reviewing the results of the Nimdzi 100 market analysis that we publish every year. I'll be publishing this slide deck as a PDF on our LinkedIn profile afterwards, and we've got a few examples of how Nimdzi can help your organization or your globalization department evolve as well, complete with some case studies on technology audits, process audits, vendor audits, all of that stuff. So if you haven't, I'll be sending out a link to that. And if you have any questions specifically for us, you can always reach out to Nimdzi Insights at info@nimdzi.com. Any other closing items? I don't think so. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to everybody in chat once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Giulia. Thank you, Laszlo. Once again,
Thank you, Giulia.
my name is Tucker Johnson, and this has been my pleasure to host you today in this event series, and we will see you next time.